In a far-off corner of the galaxy, on a desolate planet far removed from the bustling cities of human civilization, there was a prison like no other. Towering walls made of reinforced steel encased an alien queen, an otherworldly figure who had once commanded legions of soldiers and ruled with an iron fist. Now she was imprisoned behind bars, shackled by the very system that feared her power. Her name was known across the universe, and whispers of her fearsome reign had spread through every corner of the galaxy. But the woman behind the steel bars was not the same one the galaxy feared. The alien queen had been defeated, and now she was nothing more than a prisoner, her once regal form reduced to a shadow of its former self. Her eyes, though fierce, were clouded with something the guards did not expect, an overwhelming sadness. The other prisoners whispered of her power, of the terror she had brought. But when they looked into her eyes, they saw a deep loneliness that made even the hardest souls feel uncomfortable. There was no denying it. The alien queen, once revered, was now a victim of her own history. She stood still in her cage, her posture regal but broken, as if waiting for something, someone, to acknowledge her humanity. The prison guards, who had long since been instructed to keep their distance, made no attempt to understand the true nature of their prisoner. They saw her only as a threat, a dangerous alien who had to be contained at all costs. They would gawk at her from behind reinforced glass, muttering fearful words among themselves. The queen's alien features, her deep blue skin, her glowing, golden eyes, and the intricate jewelry that adorned her body, were all a testament to her once mighty status. But none of the guards looked at her with anything other than fear and awe. They had been told to be wary of her, to treat her as an untamable beast, and so they did. It was on the quietest of nights, however, when everything began to change. A new guard, a young human soldier by the name of Marcus, was assigned to keep watch over the alien queen. He was young and still had the fire of ambition burning in him. He had seen other prisoners, criminals from all walks of life, but he had never been tasked with guarding an alien queen. To him, this was a strange, almost mythical duty. He had heard the stories, how she had once been unstoppable, how her name struck fear into the hearts of the strongest warriors. To him, she was just another prisoner, albeit one with a reputation that preceded her. Marcus stood at his post, gazing through the thick glass that separated him from the alien queen. He had been told not to interact with her, to keep his distance and maintain control of the prison. He followed his orders just as he always had. But something about her drew him in. It wasn't fear. No, it was something else entirely. As he watched her, he began to notice small details that no one else seemed to care about. The way she held herself as though in constant pain, her eyes shifting to the door as if she were hoping for someone to walk in. At first, Marcus thought it was just a trick of the light, but over time, he became certain. There was something in her gaze, a sadness, a yearning that no one had ever spoken about. Her eyes, though cold and calculating at first glance, held a deep sorrow that cut through the layers of fear surrounding her. The more Marcus observed her, the more he realized that the alien queen was not the monster everyone thought her to be. She wasn't the cold, calculating ruler who had destroyed entire civilizations. She was a woman who had been betrayed, imprisoned, and forgotten. One night, as Marcus walked past her cage, the queen turned her head and met his eyes. For a brief moment, their gazes locked. The air between them seemed to shift, as if the world around them had disappeared. Marcus could feel his heart race as her golden eyes pierced into him. She wasn't just looking at him, she was looking through him as though she could see into his very soul. A shiver ran down Marcus's spine. He had heard the stories of the queen's power, of her ability to manipulate minds and break wills, but in that moment he didn't feel fear. Instead, he felt something else, something he couldn't quite name. It was as if the queen were trying to communicate with him, to tell him something with just her eyes. Her stare was not one of hostility, but of longing. The moment passed quickly and Marcus turned away, his heart pounding in his chest. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was different about her. Something no one had bothered to see. He returned to his post, but he couldn't get her out of his mind. What was it that made him feel this way? Why did he, unlike the others, feel a sense of pity rather than fear? As the days went on, Marcus found himself returning to the Queen's cage more and more. Each time she would look at him with those same golden eyes, filled with the same unspoken pain. He began to feel a strange pull towards her, a pull that he couldn't explain. It was as though the barriers that separated them, human and alien, prisoner and guard, were slowly starting to crumble. And as he stood there watching her from across the room, Marcus couldn't help but wonder, was she really the monster they said she was? Or was she something entirely different? Was the alien queen truly the terror the galaxy feared? Or was she just a woman trapped and broken, yearning for someone to see her for what she truly was? And so, the stage was set. The moment of connection between Marcus and the alien queen had begun. The question remained, would Marcus continue to see her as the monster everyone feared? Or would he be the one to break through the walls of isolation and show her the compassion she so desperately needed? The story was just beginning. Days turned into weeks, and each night, Marcus found himself returning to his post, unable to shake the haunting image of the alien queen. The memory of her golden eyes, filled with so much sadness, echoed in his mind. He couldn't get her out of his thoughts. Every time he passed her cage, his gaze would involuntarily lock with hers, and each time the same deep sorrow would stare back at him. But what was it? What was behind that sorrowful gaze? It wasn't until one evening, when the prison was eerily quiet, that Marcus found himself drawn to her once again. The sounds of the usual bustle of the prison had faded into the background. There were no other guards patrolling nearby, and the silence felt heavy. It was as if the whole world had fallen away, leaving only the two of them in this vast empty space. This time, when Marcus stood in front of her cage, the alien queen didn't turn her gaze to meet his. Instead, she stood still, her head slightly bowed as if weighed down by an invisible burden. She looked smaller in that moment, fragile, as if the world's weight had crushed her spirit. Marcus couldn't help but notice the subtle tremor in her posture, the way her body shuddered ever so slightly. It was almost as if she was holding something back, something she was too afraid to show. His hand, trembling with uncertainty, reached out to the cage's bars. There was something deeply compelling about her, something that urged him to understand her pain, even though he had no idea where it came from or how it had started. He had been trained to see her as a threat, to fear her, but now he saw her as a broken creature, a being in desperate need of understanding. He stepped closer to the cage, peering at her, his heart aching with an emotion he couldn't fully comprehend. For the first time, the alien queen lifted her head, but this time, it wasn't with the fierce, commanding presence Marcus had seen before. No, this time it was different. Her eyes were still that striking gold, but they were dimmed, full of something more than sorrow. There was a loneliness in her eyes, a silent cry for help, and it shook him to his core. Without a word, she slowly moved toward him, her movements fluid yet cautious. Her hand reached out toward the bars, her fingers grazing the cold steel. It was as if she was yearning to touch the outside world once again. The delicate sound of her fingers brushing against the bars sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. There was an elegance to her, a grace that no one had ever bothered to notice before. But now, in the quiet of the prison, it was all Marcus could see. The alien queen let out a quiet sigh, a sound so soft, yet so full of emotion, that it made Marcus's heart ache. It was as if she were releasing years of grief, pain, and isolation, all at once. The sound was not one of defiance, as he expected from someone of her power. It was a sound of surrender, of weariness, as if the weight of her circumstances had finally worn her down. Marcus stood still, unsure of what to do, but something inside him told him to stay. He didn't know what was happening to him, but it was undeniable. This alien queen, this terrifying creature, was not the monster everyone had made her out to be. She was someone broken, lost in a world that had discarded her, someone who had never known true compassion. "Why are you here?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. But the alien queen heard it, her eyes flickering up at him in response. For a long moment there was silence between them. Then, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, she spoke. "Do you think I wanted this?" Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it, an undeniable sharpness, like a blade hiding beneath the surface. "Do you think I chose to be trapped in this cage? To be feared and hunted like an animal?" Marcus's breath caught in his throat. She wasn't speaking like a queen, a ruler. She wasn't even speaking like a soldier. She spoke like a person who had suffered, who had been pushed to the brink of despair. The realization hit him with the force of a hammer. This alien queen had been a prisoner of her own fate, just like any other soul trapped in this prison. She had been locked away, her true nature hidden behind a facade of power and cruelty. "I never chose to be what I am," she continued, her voice trembling now, her eyes staring into Marcus's soul. "I was made to be something I am not. I am not your enemy. I am not the monster they say I am." She paused, and the silence that followed was thick, oppressive. "I am only a woman who has lost everything." Marcus stood frozen, caught between the weight of her words and the powerful emotions they stirred within him. He had always believed that the alien queen was dangerous, that she was a threat to humanity. But now, standing before her, he saw something else. He saw a woman, broken and desperate for something he had never considered: compassion. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing. The prisoner in the steel cage was no longer the monster everyone feared. She was someone who had been pushed to the edge, someone whose pain was so deep that it had become a part of her very being. The walls that separated them, human and alien, seemed to grow thinner with every word she spoke. For the first time, Marcus found himself asking, who was she really? What had turned her into the creature the galaxy feared? And more importantly, what could he do to help her? The realization began to settle in his mind, and with it the weight of his decision. He had seen the alien queen in a way no one else had. He had seen her true pain, her vulnerability, and he could no longer ignore it. The question was no longer whether or not she could be saved. The question was whether he could find the courage to reach out and offer the compassion she so desperately needed. As he stood there watching her, he knew that something had changed between them, and he couldn't walk away from it. Not now. Not when he had finally begun to see the truth. The Gyu. Weeks that followed felt like an eternity to Marcus. He couldn't ignore the alien queen's words, nor could he escape the overwhelming feeling that had taken root in his chest. Every time he stood guard over her cage, he found himself questioning everything he had been taught. She was no longer just the feared alien warrior. She was a woman, someone who had been misunderstood, someone who had suffered. She had a past full of pain, but also a yearning for something that seemed impossible in her current life. Love, understanding, compassion. His nights at the prison became restless. He couldn't shake the image of her sad eyes, her longing expression, the way she stared through the bars as if she could see a world far beyond her reach. Each glance he caught from her made him feel both trapped and connected. He wasn't sure if it was pity or something deeper, but he knew he couldn't simply watch her suffer anymore. But Marcus was a soldier, a guard bound by duty. He had a responsibility to follow orders, to maintain the security of the prison, and most importantly, to keep a safe distance from the alien queen. No one, not even the highest-ranking officers, seemed to care that there was more to her than just a dangerous criminal. They saw her as a weapon, a tool, something to be kept locked away until further notice. But Marcus saw her differently now. He could no longer look at her as an enemy. He had seen the cracks in the armor, the vulnerability in her eyes. Yet, his duty remained. He had sworn to protect the prison, to keep its secrets and its inhabitants safe. The queen was a threat, a symbol of what could happen when power went unchecked. His feelings for her were dangerous, and if anyone discovered them, he could lose everything. His job, his reputation, his very freedom. Everything was at stake. And so, he struggled, torn between his growing compassion for the alien queen and his duty to the prison. One evening, after his shift ended, Marcus found himself standing in front of her cage once again. It was late and the prison was quiet, save for the occasional clink of metal from far off in the hallways. This time the queen was sitting on the floor of her cell, her head bowed. For a moment, Marcus hesitated, unsure of whether to approach. He had told himself countless times that he should keep his distance, that he couldn't afford to get involved with her. But each time he told himself that, the words didn't sit right. She lifted her head slowly as he approached. Her golden eyes met his, and once again there was an unspoken understanding between them. It was as if she had been waiting for him to see what no one else had. There was something raw in her gaze now, something even deeper than the sadness he had seen before. It was desperation, a silent plea for someone to care, someone to show her that she was more than just a prisoner. "I know what you're thinking," she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. "You think I'm a monster, don't you? You think I deserve to be here?" She paused, looking away as if she couldn't bear to see his reaction. Everyone else does. Marcus stood there, frozen. The words she spoke struck him like a physical blow. He didn't know how to respond. Of course she was right. He had been taught to fear her, to see her as an alien threat to humanity. But now, with every word she spoke, with every glance she gave him, Marcus found himself questioning everything he had been taught. The truth was, he didn't see her as a monster anymore. He saw her as a woman who had been broken by her circumstances, a woman who had been cast aside by a world that didn't understand her. "I don't think you're a monster," Marcus finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. He could feel his heart racing in his chest, the weight of his words sinking in. I think you've been hurt. And I think you're just trying to survive, just like anyone else." The alien queen's eyes softened, and for the first time, she seemed vulnerable, her fierce exterior slipping away. She reached out towards him, her hand trembling as she touched the bars of her cage. "Then why are you here?" she asked. "Why do you watch me from behind these bars if not to fear me?" Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. He had been so careful, so guarded. But now, standing before her, he realized that there was no way to deny it any longer. He couldn't just stand there and do nothing. He couldn't keep pretending that this was just his duty, that his feelings for her were irrelevant. He had to make a choice. His mind raced as he weighed the options. If he defied his orders, if he took any action to show her compassion, he could be branded a traitor, a man who had allowed his emotions to cloud his judgment. He could lose everything, his career, his life, his place in the world. But what if, by not acting, he was losing something even more important? His humanity, his capacity for empathy. He wasn't sure how much longer he could pretend that everything was fine, that he was in control of the situation when he clearly wasn't. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, his voice full of conviction. "No one should be locked away like this, regardless of what you've done. You're not a monster." The alien queen's gaze softened even further, and a single tear slid down her cheek. For the first time in a long while, she looked at Marcus, as if he were the only person in the universe who could understand her. But then, just as quickly, the look in her eyes shifted to one of fear. She pulled her hand back from the bars, her body tensing as if expecting an attack. Marcus took a step back, realizing that he had said too much, done too much. The walls around them, both physical and emotional, were coming down, and he wasn't sure he could stop it. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was, he didn't know what he wanted. He only knew one thing. He couldn't walk away from this. He couldn't abandon her. Not now, not when she needed him most. But as he turned to leave, he knew that his decision had been made. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. and the consequences, whatever they may be, were something he would have to face head-on. The struggle for control, both his own and hers, had only just begun. The days after his decision felt like a blur to Marcus. Every moment he spent in the prison felt more intense than the last, as though time itself was drawing him closer to a final reckoning. He had crossed a line that separated duty from his heart, the cold calculations of a soldier from the burning need for compassion. The alien queen was no longer just a prisoner in his mind. She had become someone he could not ignore, someone who had sparked a revolution inside him. Yet, with every passing day, the weight of his choices grew heavier. Could he keep defying orders? Could he continue risking everything to offer her the compassion she so desperately craved? The question gnawed at him constantly. He began to visit her more frequently, each time finding her more fragile, more withdrawn. It was clear that she had begun to lose hope. Her eyes, once fierce and proud, now appeared clouded, distant. The alien queen, who had once stood as an indomitable force, seemed to be shrinking in the face of her isolation, and Marcus felt his heart break each time he saw her. She was a queen, once revered across galaxies, now reduced to this, trapped behind bars in a cold, sterile cell, separated from the world and everyone in it. The walls of her cage were not just physical, they were emotional, mental, and psychological. They had become so deeply ingrained in her being that even the slightest hope seemed beyond her grasp. But Marcus was determined to change that. The truth was undeniable. She was not the monster they had made her out to be. She was human in her pain, her need for connection, and most importantly, her longing for love. She had suffered enough. She had been betrayed and abandoned by her people. Yet, in all her pain, she had never asked for anything more than to be seen for who she truly was. One cold evening, Marcus stood in front of her cage once again. The atmosphere in the prison was thick with tension, the air crackling with something undefinable. He could feel the weight of the decision he was about to make, the consequences of his actions echoing through his mind. The guards had become suspicious. Rumors had begun to spread about the way Marcus had been interacting with the queen. He had broken rules, and those who followed him were beginning to notice. If anyone found out, it would cost him everything. His career, his life, his freedom. All of it would be gone. But the longer he stood there staring at the alien woman, the more certain he became. His heart knew what it wanted, what it needed. He couldn't let her suffer any longer. He couldn't let her rot behind bars, a prisoner of a system that never understood her. He had made a choice long ago, to stand by her, to see her as a person, not a weapon. It was time to follow through, no matter the cost. The queen looked up at him as he approached, her eyes filled with an unspoken question. For a long moment, neither of them said a word. The silence between them was deafening, filled with all the things they had never said. But there was a connection in that silence, an understanding that had been building between them for weeks. She no longer saw him as just a guard, and he no longer saw her as just a prisoner. They had become something more, something neither of them fully understood but both deeply needed. "I can't stand by and watch you suffer anymore," Marcus said, his voice filled with determination. "You're not the monster they say you are. You never were." Her eyes widened, and for the first time a flicker of hope appeared in them. It was a small thing, but it was enough to make Marcus's heart race. He knew the risks, knew that every moment he spent with her was another step into the unknown. But in that moment it didn't matter. All that mattered was her freedom. All that mattered was giving her the chance to be more than a prisoner. He stepped closer to her cage, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm going to free you," he whispered. "We're leaving this place. Together." She shook her head slightly as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You'll be caught," she said softly, her voice shaking. "They'll kill you." "I don't care," Marcus replied, his voice unwavering. "I can't live with myself if I leave you here trapped like this. You deserve better. You deserve to be free." The queen's gaze softened as she took a deep breath. The tension in her body seemed to ease slightly, and for a moment she simply stared at him as though trying to find the truth in his words. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she reached out to the bars of her cage, her hand trembling. "I've waited so long for someone to see me," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. "For someone to believe that I am more than just a weapon, more than just a monster." Marcus's heart broke as he reached out, placing his hand on the bars beside hers. Their fingers brushed lightly, and in that simple contact, a spark seemed to ignite between them. It was as though a bond had been formed, a bond forged in pain and shared isolation and the desperate need for love and connection. "I see you," Marcus said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "And I won't let you suffer any longer. You're not alone anymore." With those words, everything changed. Marcus quickly moved to the control panel near the door of the cage. He had learned the system, the guards' routines, the shifts. Everything was in place. He was ready. As he typed in the final code to release her, he glanced at her one last time. The alien queen stood taller now, her posture more regal than he had ever seen it. The chains that had bound her for so long were breaking, both physically and metaphorically. The door to her cage slid open with a low, mechanical hum. The moment she stepped out, Marcus could feel the shift in the air, as if the world itself had taken a breath. The alien queen, once a prisoner, was free. But as they moved toward the exit, a loud alarm blared through the prison. The guards were on high alert. Marcus turned to the queen, his hand outstretched. "We have to go now," he said, urgency in his voice. Together, they ran through the dark corridors, evading the guards, their footsteps echoing in the silent halls. For the first time in her life, the alien queen was running not to escape from the world, but to find a new one. She was no longer trapped in a cage. She was free. And Marcus? He was no longer just a soldier. He was a man who had chosen love over fear, compassion over duty. He had found his redemption and with it a new purpose. As they stepped into the unknown, their hands intertwined. They knew that no matter what awaited them, they would face it together.